countdown
I
as
like
well
that.
as I do, Kristen?
I liked it. I liked it.
All right, folks, we are live, and we are talking. This is what do we call this show? This is it ain't easy being a human.
That is correct. Are you going to put that up on the screen?
It ain't easy being a human. This is one of those universal truths. It's part of that human condition. And today we thought we would talk about the outsized emotional impact that leaders have. If you are at the head of the pack in some way, if you're responsible for whether or not George is employed tomorrow, you are a leader, whether you like it or not. And you the things that you do, the things that you say, have an outsized impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And often you learn it the hard way, or at least Kristen did.
Yeah, I don't. I would say I have not yet learned it all the way. I'm still a student of this particular principle.
Well, and I got to be involved with big corporate programs that did onboarding for people managers and leaders. I will tell you though, who's doing the courses right now on post-pandemic leadership and how to have compassion and heart while you're still in business? So I think we're all still students.
We are all still students. Well, there's a great thing to aspire to, right? Is to always be a student. So, Kristen, this is our first slightly more formal show.
We've actually organized ourselves, everyone. You're welcome.
Why don't I ask you to formally introduce yourself?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Usually we're so freestyle. So, hello, friends. I am Kristen Graham, and I am a recovering corporate leader. And that's where you say, hi, Kristen.
Hi, Kristen. Sorry, I haven't gone through this particular.
I needed some validation, like some real-time validation. No, that was awesome. But I never had aspirations to do corporate. I studied as a journalist and came out of journalism school right in time for 9/11. So did not end up going and being a magazine editor in New York City, Kristen's dream, and went accidentally into corporate and have loved it. No, but I loved it. I never knew that was hi, Phil Sherman, who is in chat. I didn't know that was a thing. I had a girlfriend who was dating a recruiter, and he was like, well, are you still a stringer? And it was for the Chicago Sun-Times. And he was like, do you want to go on an interview? And I'm like, sure. And all of that to say that I've spent the next 20 plus years in corporate, and really, and I think our conversation today on employee side, right? Communications, culture, engagement. But I'm really excited about the topic today, Aaron, because it was about management and leadership and all the things you learn all the hard way. So what about you?
What about me? I am Aaron Schmuckler. I'm a co-founder and a company culture engineer at a company called The Yes Works. What we do, we call company culture engineering, because there are all these interdependent forces that shape culture, from the way people behave to the policies and procedures and even corporate structure that's there. And so we help people see the matrix as far as how is your culture formed, and what are the things that are influencing it. And so this is a topic that is of particular interest to me as somebody both who has been on the receiving end of a leader's outsized impact, both for better and for worse, and also somebody who has dished out some of the outsized leaders' impact, I think, also for better and for worse. So the way we decided to have this conversation is to trade bullet points. So, each of these as an idea to spark a bit of the conversation. So, Kristen, do you want to lead off, or shall I?
Ooh, yeah. So let's tell everybody what we're doing. So just so that Aaron and I get ourselves excited, and usually we're super free flow. Like we've done some clubhouse rooms where we just go in and It's kind of, what did we say last week in Clubhouse? Like mental ping pong, the ping pong balls of life. But we've decided for your sakes, y'all, to organize ourselves. So Aaron came up with this really brilliant topic. Although I got to tell you, I'm still back on when you said the Matrix. I just went to Keanu, so I'm just having like a side moment over here about.
He's welcome to join the conversation, Keanu, if you're out there listening.
I'm just saying. Yeah, I kind of like, which pill are we taking? But so what we're going to do is on this subject of outsized impact that leaders have, and I think a lot of us have experienced it on different sides. We've organized ourselves with like point counterpoint. So what I'm going to ask you, Aaron, go ahead and kick us off, and then we don't know what each other's going to say because that's the ping pong.
So I'm kind of a neuroscience junkie, an amateur neuroscience collector, and so I'll lead us off with a bit of kind of the evolutionary neuroscience that says that in these kinds of in social interaction where you may feel under threat socially, in other words, if you are trying to evaluate in an interaction with another human being, whether you are in or out of the group, as far as your brain is concerned, this is a life or death situation. And so, people's greatest fear, one of the greatest fears ever recorded is the fear of public speaking. Because if you have all of the eyes of the tribe on you, that is a moment when your being in or out may be at risk. And so why do you as a leader have an outsized impact? Well, part of the reason is because whether I am in or out is a matter of life or death, according to my brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. As a fellow brain science nerd, I think, and anybody who's ever been to a junior high dance, like, we all know what it's like to be like, am I in or am I out? Don't even get me started on social media and kids these days. But I think that you're right. There's something to that conformity that is about survival of the fittest. So, and you're right, because one of the other components that come to this when I look at it as a communications professional is we are always either emitting or receiving signals constantly. So your point about scanning the horizon of the tribe to see where you fit, it really is around survival. So I think that's very astute.
If we think about the other places where we have social networks of a kind, they're not nearly as fragile networks as the networks that we have at work, right? Your family, right? Most people, most families, most of the time, it is pretty hard to be out. You might be on the outs a little bit. You might be ridiculed a little bit. You might be a black sheep, but you're still part of the flock. And speaking of flock, right? Our churches, they are not places that people are very often required to leave. And yet work is a place where people come in, not freely of choice, right? You freely announce your candidacy, but then the ball is out of your court. And as long as you're there, the ball is somewhat in your court. You can choose to stay as long as you like. Until and unless you're no longer free to stay.
Yeah, that's interesting. And not just stay, but prosper. If we're really looking at the professional space, because the whole, hunter-gatherer, you're right. You have to have that tribal permission or endorsement in order to be fruitful. And as it's funny you mentioned public speaking. As a public speaker myself, I think, well, I'm missing a few marbles. We both know that. But that standing in front of a crowd and that kind of adrenaline and that acceptance and back to kind of all the signals, there are modern ways that's still showing up. So I love that. Point number one. We should also mention for anybody who's watching us live, and I think we're on, I don't even know where you posted us. Like we're basically in one of Jeff Bezos' satellites somewhere. I don't even know. I'm still waiting for Keanu. But if anybody wants to disagree, comment, we welcome that. We relish that. So feel free if you
hit us up in the chat. We're paying attention.
Yes, yes, we are. So I love that. I love how you went like old school BC on us with some brain chemistry. Well done, sir. I think the point that I would add too for leaders and employees on either side of an outsized presence, it's intention versus impact. We just started talking about that, you and I, a little bit too. There, you can be a leader and have the intention of what you've said. That is your responsibility, but how it landed on your team or on individuals, that is also your responsibility, because you could be saying something and have the intention, and we see this a lot with diversity, inclusion, access, etc. But my intention was to do this. But if you're going to be a leader of caliber, you also have to step up and own how it was received, how it landed. And that is definitely something I learned the hard way as I was coming up in the ranks.
So help Kristen, because I know exactly what you mean, but let's make sure that the listener does too. Help peel apart intention and impact so we can really clearly see that distinction.
So I think it can be in a couple of ways. One, well, first there's tonality of how something is said. I mean, I was having a conversation with a bunch of MBA students recently, and we talked about text messages versus emails versus in person. And we got in this whole long separate thing of what okay is in a text. Now, I'm not cool at all, right? So I had to go to these students. But if it's okay spelled out, okay, okay, capital OK, K, KK. I mean, I could go. I mean, we only have like 3 more hours here, so I won't go. But just how a single word or effort can convey so many different things. So tonality.
And so you're telling me that each of those different ways of texting okay has a different meaning to people in this particular culture.
Well, it's a larger culture, and not the cool one that you and I are part of. But I mean, in terms of because they were saying like, well, and do you use punctuation? And you know, it's like okay, period feels different than K. And so anyway, like I said, that's a whole separate subgroup of reading millennials. But so there's tonality, there's humor, because I'll tell anybody in a supervisory or people management perspective, humor is extraordinarily subjective. And so really being careful and artful with that. There's, of course, globalization. All the phraseology, inside baseball, Western references. I'm actually getting ready to do a presentation for another MBA group all about globalization and communication and how to make sure that you come across in respectful ways, things that we don't even think about sometimes. And then just even sarcasm. You and I have a shorthand with each other. We can joke around, but if somebody's overhearing our conversation, they could read our interaction differently.
Oh, big time. Right. I mean, I could say, oh, Kristen, you're such a jerk. Right. And I just learned from a good friend of mine that her daughter has autism. And that the sarcasm, the fact that what I mean by, oh, Kristen, you're such a jerk, is I actually really like you and enjoy our interactions. That meaning would be lost on my friend's daughter because what I said was the words, you are a jerk. And she would wonder why I was being so mean to you in public and what I had against you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, because of all my years of studying communications and journalism, my biggest insights into communication was having a son on the autism spectrum. And you were absolutely right that cognitively the processing is there, but sarcasm is very challenging for him. And so I've learned a lot about what we just said with intention versus impact of reframing, and also cliches, things that just become subtext or things that you're learning. And synonyms, it drives him crazy. He's like, can we just have one word that means that? It's like,
you know, so if you are out there and you're wondering, you know, what is my impact versus my intention? If you've ever found yourself saying, what I meant was, I didn't mean that, I was just joking. These are some of the phrases that you could hear coming out of your mouth that mean that you're not having the impact that you intend.
That's a really good way to put it too, because I think the second point that I would put on here as we're talking about oversized impact is, as leaders, we need to have the courage to follow up and to ask about signals that we see from other people who might be uncomfortable, or who might be reading us not as we intended necessarily. But I think the ownership is on us to come back and be like, hey, Aaron, in that conversation, I thought I saw a reaction to this. Can you walk me through what that conversation meant for you?
Yeah. Juicy stuff.
It is. It is.
And so there's the one more thing that's kind of tickling my brain about this this distinction that you're making between intention and impact, and they both are a leader's responsibility.
Yes.
Is that it's very interesting to have a responsibility that you don't have complete control over.
Yes.
Right.
It's like parenting.
Yeah, that's right. So if I say, oh, Kristen, you're such a jerk, right? The impact on you may not be what I intend. And it's my responsibility, though it is not inside my control, that you have that response, the response of receiving it the way that I intend. And that it is still my responsibility. That gets it. That's what you're saying about it's my responsibility to observe the micro expressions. It's my responsibility to notice the signals and so clarify if there's any chance that I see that my intention has gone awry. So in order to be responsible for the impact, in order to really fully embrace that responsibility, sometimes you have to spiral in on your intention and correct misapprehensions, take ownership even of the other person's reading you wrong.
And it's hard. It's nice to sit here and say, hey, we have the ownership for that. Most of us are like, listen, I didn't even have lunch today, Kristen. How am I supposed to run around and like make sure that everybody read my humor right? I hear you. And as leaders and as managers, we should be having regular communication streams with our people. And so one of the things, and you and I talked about this last week, I think in a different conversation, is we need to have space so that we can get the feedback that we don't even know to ask for sometimes. So if you're having regular check-ins, as a leader, as a supervisor, to say, hey, tell me something that I'm not asking. Tell me something that I don't know. Or what is feedback that I should be aware of? I want to just test my understanding of signals and opening that door. Because how many employees are going to be like, hey, boss, you know what wasn't funny? That joke last night. So I think we need to make space for people to, and we're going to have to do it multiple times. They may not trust it. Back to your point about survival, the first few times.
Right. Yeah. They may not believe this is a safe space for you to give me feedback. That's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow because they're coming from leaders where that was not the case.
Right. Especially if you're doing it like this on technology channels, or like, I know so many people who are like, I'm not putting anything into email. I don't want a trace of any feedback. I don't want to, I mean, I think a lot of people feel like I don't even want to take those anonymous surveys because I doubt they're anonymous. And I've got all this noise outside my window, speaking of feedback.
Well, I'll give my second bullet now.
Do it.
What I wrote down is you're the boss, so you're the boss. So we've pointed to this, right? You have outsized impact essentially because the role responsibility that you have, the role that you have is you represent the company. You're not just representing, one of the things that happens in our leadership relationships is we feel a certain degree of comfort with the people who report to us. And so we generalize the comfort that we feel to them. And we believe that they feel that same level of comfort because we're not under any kind of threat from them. The truth is that in this relationship, you represent the company.
Yeah.
You represent their ability to draw a salary. You represent the decision about whether or not they're going to be able to continue to draw a salary next month. So your impact, the impact of the things that you say and the things that you do inside that relationship are outsized because your influence on the relationship itself, its very existence, is outsized.
That's true. And your point about you being comfortable, which goes back to kind of intention and humor or things that you're wanting to do. And I think that leads into my additional bullet. It's there is not one size fits all. I used to work for a great CEO when and he said there's no peanut butter approach when it comes to people, whether that's benefits, whether that's communications rollout, change management. And to your point about just because you're feeling comfortable with something, we can't assume that everybody else is either on board with it or wanting to receive things in the same way. I'll give you an example of something that I learned the hard way. That's a long list, but and I've learned in the future to ask people individually, like, hey, how do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to get recognition? How do you like to have communication? And I had a phenomenal woman who worked for me, but she was very, very shy. And so when it came to recognition, pulling her up on a stage at an event, giving a big thing, that would have really, really diluted the impact of the intention of recognition. And so I learned by asking, because there's no peanut butter approach, she would much rather have a quiet moment with me, hand her the service anniversary, the performance recognition, than ever be on a stage. And then other people, they absolutely want that. And so really being able to say, not just how do you want feedback, but also just because one person wants a bonus, somebody else might want a day off or recognition in different forms. So seeking to understand, to your point, it's not just here's how I'm going to give you a gift card or let's all go have cupcakes in the lobby at 3 p.m. Some people are like, no, thanks. Happy birthday, Sheila. I'll see you tomorrow. So when you said you're the bot, like those command performances, actually the impact might be disengaging. Now I want a cupcake though.
Sorry, I got nothing for you.
For Sheila.
All right. So that takes me to the outsized influence now, I think, of, again, the sense of belonging. I'm back to the sense of belonging and the outsized importance of the community at work. And I think back to a client of mine who brought me in because they had to lay off 20% of their employees. You know, it was just many years ago, the nature of the company, the nature of the way things had changed for them. They just could not kind of hold up under the burden of that many FTEs. So they had to lay off 20% of their workforce. And what this head of HR was finding was that the remainder, these people, had survivor's guilt.
Oh, of course.
Of course. And this would have been important in the 50s. I think it's extra important now. And I don't go in very much for the kind of generational differences. Kids these days. And yet there is a contextual difference in the way that we are social. And there aren't as many people in church. There aren't as many people in clubs and things like that. There aren't as many people at Rotary and in some of these other outside of work communities. And so because work is for some people kind of the only or one of the only bigger communities that they have, if you become out of that community, not only have you lost your salary, but you've lost
your social,
the greatest strength, the greatest stronghold in your social community. So we're in a different time than a lot of the folks who are now bosses, right, grew up in.
Sure.
And the importance of that social network has grown.
Yeah, especially during the pandemic, you have whole teams of people who have started at a company or a community without ever having met people in person.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I think it has a magnified impact in terms of, am I in or out? And then if you want to talk about all these signals, trying to get a read because you're looking at somebody's screen or you're reading their Slack message or their Teams channel, and you're trying to figure out, what did Kristen mean by KK instead of okay? And we're putting all these layers and layers. You're absolutely right that that social stress on top of it, it's and on the leaders too, during the times of what's known as the Great Resignation. And I just read that September marked the lowest amount of women in the workforce in 15 years. So if you're on the other side as a leader and you're trying to get the signals of, are you going to stay? Are you going to help us survive, us as a company? Trying to get that through a Zoom versus a room, you're going to have to work even harder to figure out, because we have become, even though we're talking more and more, we're becoming a lot more isolated in our conversations.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, the signals of trust or the signals of trustworthiness are much harder as well, right? I mean, am I making eye contact with you right now? It's a little hard to tell, right? Eye contact is one of those things that we use to signal trust and to signal trustworthiness. Hands are huge, right? If you study charisma at all, right? They tell you, make sure you present your hands when people can see your palms. That is reassuring. And most of the time, we're not seeing each other's hands at all.
But in some cultures, I want to go back to that globalization, right? The creepy eye contact. I mean, how many people are like, you know what I want to look at some more? A web camera, because that's intimate. But your point about the eye contact and the hand, just stop. But you get globalization in there, you get gender differences, you get a lot. I mean, and I think there's a lot of women who will talk about feedback they've gotten in their annual reviews about how they come across by doing very similar behavior. So but that's impact and intention and the rest of it. So I think that you're right. The sedimentary layers of what's happening in social dynamics here are very, very impactful.
So I think I've lost track. I think I've lost track of whose bullet is next, Kristen.
I know, and we're almost at half an hour. So I'll give you kind of my final one, and then now I want to show you my hands a lot.
Yes, please.
So I mentioned earlier about it's our ownership to make sure that we are checking in on how our messages and our impact is being received. And I think that we will have to ask repeatedly for that, because there's, to your point about psychological safety, huge. The other thing that I want to put out there for us to be aware of is it's not even necessarily what we do anymore and what we say. It is what we tolerate is a message to others. It's a signal to others.
Ooh, say more about that, because I think I agree with you so profoundly that I just need to hear it some more.
Well, it really goes back into, again, not just what we model, but what we allow. You mentioned earlier about family dynamics, right? And I think that anybody who's leading teams and the rest of it, everybody has different roles. And so there can be outsized impact by individuals on a team. And so it is up to the leader to make sure, and there's a big, big difference between inclusion, diversity, and equity, right? Not everybody needs the same amount of airtime. They may not want it, back to my examples of recognition. However, what is being allowed and tolerated becomes a reflection on the leadership and on the overall well-being of a team or a function. So our ownership, back to what leaders are responsible for, is making sure that you are diligently and deliberately rooting out all those signals. And even if you take some of the feedback offline with a person, to make sure that those signals come back out and people understand what is and is not, where that bar is constantly being set. It matters.
I can't remember who I initially heard this from, and now I've seen it in various forms from all kinds of different people. The wherever it came from, originally, this idea, I think, is something you were just pointing at. Your culture is defined by the worst behaviors you tolerate.
Absolutely.
Oh, I mean, that can really cut to the quick, right? People I'm asked sometimes by leaders, why aren't my people accountable? And the answer is because you tolerate it.
Right.
You've got a culture of tolerance. And of course, that sounds like a good thing, right? We all want cultures of tolerance. We want to tolerate diversity. We want to tolerate, the mavericks, perhaps. There are a lot of things that we do want to tolerate, and we have to be very purposeful, very deliberate about what do we want to tolerate, what is not tolerable.
Yeah.
And then, and this can be the hard part, we have to figure out compassionate ways of being intolerant of the intolerable.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my last bullet point, which is we're not saying here, folks, that that because of your outsized impact, you should not be having accountability conversations. You should be having these hard conversations. You should be having them with compassion.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to your point about the corporate culture, it's often been said, it's what you will hire and fire over. And so you having compassion on both sides of that, if that's the bookend, and then being able to blend that into how people experience you on a daily basis. I feel like we admired a very big challenge that a lot of companies and teams are facing, but it's very, very important. So good stuff.
It is good stuff.
I'm eager to hear what people say about this in the comments once we post.
Do I remember, Kristen, that you had a bonus bullet point?
Ooh, well, I did, but I think I blended it in there.
You mentioned
I think there was having the courage to ask. One other thing that I'll put in there too, it's not just what you plan. It's not just your coordinated emails and the rest of it. I remember one time getting feedback from somebody back when we were in the offices, and I used to walk in and she told me later, she's like, you always say good morning to him and you didn't say good morning to me. And I have no doubt that that person was right. And in my recollection, I was like, I thought you were on the phone. So I just said, but that was back to, if that person noticed it, it had an outsized impact on them. And so I would have never known. So I think that there's a lot of ways that our informal signals are being read as well.
That's so important. You know, it reminds me of my grandmother, who was wonderful, by the way, in so many ways. Despite the story that's coming, right? You could walk into my grandmother's house with like 25 things in your hands, stuff tucked under your elbows, and if you did not somehow find a way to drop that stuff within 3 seconds of walking in her door, she would say, "What? No hug?" Right? So
I love it.
And this, my grandmother was Jewish. There's and Jewish humor is wonderful stuff. There's a joke also that's that gets a lot of currency in my family. You know, a mother buys her son a red tie and a blue tie, and the next morning he comes down wearing the red tie, and she says, "What? You didn't like the blue one?" So, the story about my grandmother and this joke both are intended to illustrate this idea, and perhaps this is my bonus bullet point. We humans are meaning making machines.
Wow.
And everything that we see, everything that we hear, we invent a narrative to go along with it. So I'll give you one final example. I remember sitting with a couple of my friends in high school in some little courtyard near our school, and there was a breeze. It was autumn, and there were 3 leaves that were kind of going around in this little whirlwind inside the courtyard. And one of us saw a predator and prey, right? It's like, oh, the one leaf is hunting the other 2, right? One of us saw some kind of flirtation, and one of us saw a game of tag. Now, these leaves, not a single one of these leaves actually had any volition. They're none of them doing anything.
Yeah.
They're all just inanimate objects caught up in a whirlwind. And yet each of us had a story going in our mind, each of us a different story to interpret this inanimate dance. We are meaning-making machines.
We are, and I'll leave you with this one then from my journalist days.
We're never going to end because this is going to lead me to come
4 hours, and then we'll be. But trust, but verify. We can trust what we're trying and all that, but verify.
So help me on. This has always been an interesting. I think Reagan is the one who came up with this phrase. So help me understand what trust but verify means. How does verify not signal mistrust?
Okay, because for this conversation, what I mean by that is you can trust your instincts, trust you're doing things in the moment. You can trust your intention, but verify how it landed. That's what I mean in this one. The second thing I'll say on a sillier note is it came from the journalism school too, but it said, if your mother says she loves you, check it out.
So one of my favorite, because often the trust but verify comes into like supervising kinds of situations, right?
Okay. Sure.
So I'll just throw out there the alternative in that kind of situation, which is trust and build in redundancies. Right.
Yeah, we're getting into a whole nother podcast here for sure.
Right. So I'll illustrate it really quickly that hospitals may trust that the power is going to come. Right. We have power. Our city's grid is pretty darn reliable.
But have generators. And
we build in redundancies because the impact of when they do fail. And by the way, all human systems fail. When they do fail, we need a safeguard.
I think that's a great point because that's about business operations. I will say one thing on the management side is trust but verify does not mean you micromanage, because that is not then trust. So.
Right. Which is where the redundancies come in, right? If the numbers on the spreadsheet really matter, I can trust your skill, I can trust your intention, and not worry at all that you are either incompetent or malignant, whatever, malintentioned, whatever the word is that I'm searching for.
I'm not worried.
And verification of your work in some way, to create redundancy, particularly on a spreadsheet that really matters.
Well, I can think of
that isn't necessarily micromanaging if it's done with the right spirit and with the right information, with the right expectation setting.
Oh. Well, I was about to say, I can't think of how a sexier way to end this than talking about a spreadsheet. So
that's right.
I feel like we went across a lot of topics. So outsized impact here. Those are some thought bubbles from the two of us. Curious what people will comment on and add and correct us on.
Yeah. So though we are live at this moment, we may not be live at your moment. True. That doesn't mean that we won't be checking out your comments. So even if your moment is not the same moment as our moment, by all means comment. We'd love to be in conversation with you, and we hope you'll stay tuned to
future nerdy
easy being a human. We'll keep coming back.
Bye, folks.